Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Craig, for that kind introduction. You know, no one told me when I agreed to do this that I was going to have to follow fried chicken. Like that, I was sitting at the table. I said, who even cooks fried chicken anymore? You know, my grandmother used to do it, and she'd do it in the middle of the day. But usually at your grandma's house, you can follow it up with a pretty good nap. I see all the suits and ties here. I don't think there are going to be many naps, certainly not at Bank 2. But I want to say congratulations, first of all, to the graduates. It's an honor for me to be here to speak a little bit about leadership and hopefully to impart some words of wisdom for sure. I also want to say congratulations to my friend Mark, who I've known for a number of years, who I got to meet at the Capitol, and I appreciate the work he's doing at Reed. Reed is they score legislators, and I was always proud of my Reed score. And I appreciate that the work is still being done there. I also appreciate Representative West, who I had a chance to meet walking in, and she does a great job. What a first-class lady, and I'm always enamored with folks that are willing to put their name on the ballot. You know, Representative West, it's often said that we all know there are people that hate us, but only those of us who put our names on the ballot get an accurate count. So I applaud you for willing to get that count. So. But it's certainly public service is something. Certainly, the career I had in public service is something I'm very proud of, and I'm always honored. We make a lot of jokes, and we often complain and criticize far too much about people that are willing to do a really, really tough job. And it was always my experience that the people that were there. Most of them, nearly all of them, were there for the right reasons. I often said before, if God were to give me but 4 months to live, I would want to spend them in the Oklahoma House of Representatives because they were always the longest 4 months of my life, every single year. And I'm sure you've had a similar experience. I have some other colleagues that are with me here today. Zach Painter, Jason is here as well as Zach Hudson. They are all, Jason Turnage, they are all part of the Bank 2 family, and Luke is here as well, and they do a great job running our retail and our commercial lending division. You know, nobody does this alone. I don't care what your attribute, what your post is, what your assignment is. It takes a team, and if you're smart, you better make sure you've got the right team, and I'm so proud that we do. I want to talk a little bit today about leadership, and I know you all that are in the class and those that are running the program already have some familiarity with leadership and what it means, and we probably all can think of our favorite leadership book. I know Good to Great was certainly one I always really enjoyed. There are many others, but you always think about what is your definition of leadership, and it's kind of this nebulous concept that people make a lot of money selling books on. But I think what I've always boiled down leadership to is getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. I think that's the first step, because they want to do it. And certainly that takes time. I have a 12-year-old daughter. I have a 12-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. My wife and I, we've been married, happily married, as a matter of fact, for 17 years. It'll be this August. And when we first started, we thought we wanted 7 children because that's God's perfect number. But then we had my son. And little boys are terrific contraception, let me tell you. They make you rethink the whole deal. But my 12-year-old daughter, she was recently involved in a science project, and she somehow, you know how it is, she was actually assigned with a bunch of guys as part of her group, her working group. She was the only girl. And, she's a 12-year-old in 7th grade, and you know how seventh grade boys are. They kind of sat back and let her take charge, and were happy to let her do it. And if they know what's best for them, it's probably the best thing too. I know my daughter; she's like her mother. But she came home one day. She came home last week, and she was really distraught because I think it was a group of 4. 2 of the guys just really weren't engaged. They kind of checked out. They said science isn't their deal. They're not that interested, and they were happy to let her just run with it. And at first, she thought she was okay just running with it. She thought that would be fine. But at some point, it kind of clicked. We're getting a group grade, and I'm doing all the work here, buddy. How do you handle that? And so she came to me for advice, which, as a dad, she even brought up kind of my past history. So, well, you've had some leadership roles, Dad. What can you tell me about this? I thought, okay, wow, this is new. So I started thinking, I thought, okay, what can I tell her to help her anecdotally see how do you motivate these guys. And again, motivating seventh grade boys is a really tough thing to do anyway. And I told her, I said, well, a couple of things, Audrey. Number one, have you invested in the people who you're trying to lead? I said, it's good now that you've got the official or unofficial role as the leader of the group, but what type of investment have you made in them early on? And I know as a company that's easier to, we can quantify our investments in the people that we lead, but there are other investments that you can make, other deposits. I'm a believer, and one of the things I know is that we have a spiritual DNA. I believe we're all spiritual creatures, and we have the ability to make deposits in the people and to speak life into people. And it's amazing how people respond to it. You see it as you see your children. You know how it is when positive reinforcement is a real deal. And so I implored my daughter Audrey. I said, why don't you start complimenting them on things that's right about them? And she just looked at me and said, Dad, there's nothing right about these boys. I mean, there is nothing. I said, no. I said, that's easy. I said, that's easy to do. It's easy to dismiss them as worthless, useless, not a contributor. I said, but the truth is, a real leader is able to look past the surface and find what's really good about that person. And so she thought about it, and she thought about it some more. And finally she said, well, I've got, and I can't remember the young man's name, he's also in my art class. She's an artist, and she said, he's a terrific artist. He's the best artist in the class. And I said, well, no wonder he's not interested in science. She's an artist, and she didn't appreciate the joke either. But I said, well, why don't you find a way to bring in his ability as an artist? I mean, that's clearly where his heart is. That's where his motivator is. Why don't you find a way to motivate him there? And she said, okay. And so she came back a couple of days later and said, I tried it and it worked. She said he's now responding. I let him, part of our assignment, I think they're doing something involving sales, and they've got the mitochondria and all that they've got to come up with. And he agreed to, and it was a sacrifice for her because she's an artist too. And she thought that was really going to be her contribution, was to make the poster board and to bring it all together. But she was willing to look past her own talents and gifts to recognize the talents and gifts of other people. And I thought that was a pretty good leadership principle. She was so excited that she was able to do it. Now, there was the other guy that was a bit more of a challenge, and finally she couldn't come up with anything. This guy was causing problems. He's got some behavioral problems, and she finally decided just to move him to a different group. She traded him. She traded him out. And certainly as a leader, sometimes that's a real principle, right? Sometimes there are people that just aren't good cultural fits. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that they don't have value. It doesn't mean that they can't contribute. It just means that for the task at hand that we've been assigned, your skill set isn't the one that we're looking for. And I think that those are important principles to remember too. The other piece of leadership that I think is important is I believe that leaders are born, that they're not made. And there's a whole lot of literature that would disagree with me. There are a whole lot of people that think that believe that leaders can be made, that you can make people into leaders. And I get that. I understand that. I think there are certainly some concepts and some principles that are universal that can be taught about leadership. But I really believe that leadership is like other gifts or spiritual gifts, and certain people are called to lead. And really, and so then your question, if you believe that, you have to believe, well, how do you know? How do you know if you're that person or not? And so I boil it down to this. I've always thought that leaders are really like others in that we all have dreams. We all have dreams. We all have visions. We all have a dream, and we all have a vision about whatever goal or task is before us. The difference between a leader is they're able, like my daughter was able to, they're able to pull people together to actually accomplish that goal and that dream. Because most dreams and visions can't be accomplished alone, right? If it's really significant, if it really matters, it's really going to involve the talents and the gifting of other people to be involved as well. And so leaders, I think about 10% of those that are called and chosen to lead, they have that ability, that they're willing to make that investment in other people. They're willing to look past their own giftings and see the giftings of others to get them to move forward. I remember when I was Speaker of the House, you would like to believe that the Speaker of the House spends most of their time thinking about the education budget, or they're thinking about transportation or moving Oklahoma forward. And that's really why I ran for Speaker of the House when I did. So I had some issues that were burning in my heart. Little did I know when I got the job at the tender age of 34 years old, that most of my time would be spent, talking to members about parking spaces and office spaces. And I mean, it's kind of like, I always say it's kind of like being a hall monitor. You remember in elementary school, sometimes your teacher would leave the class and they say, here, you're in charge, take names. I mean, that's the worst job you could ever have, is to police your friends, right? That's really what the Speaker of the House did. But as Speaker of the House, one of the things that's unique in its leadership role, unlike us in the private sector, who were given a delegation of duties and assignments, and we're given a certain level of authority, the Speaker of the House is chosen by members who are elected by somebody else. So I didn't choose the people that I'm called to serve. They chose me. And the truth is, as Speaker, they can pick somebody else any minute that they get ready. It only takes 51 votes for somebody to stand up and say, hey, this guy's out the door. And so your tools for leadership are limited. And so what I found out very quickly, I knew I wasn't the smartest person in the room. The Oklahoma legislature, as is represented here today by Representative West, there is a huge majority of people that are extraordinarily gifted and talented. Now, of course, like other scenarios, the newspapers, the television, they report on the house that's on fire, right? Not the entire neighborhood that's not. So you get to see that 5% that's not part of the other 95% who I think are extraordinarily gifted and talented. So what I figured out very quickly, if we're going to build coalitions, if we're going to build teams, if we're going to compete against the Senate for the best ideas, if we're going to move Oklahoma forward, we've got to implore the gifts and talents of the people that are around us, even people who think differently than I did, even people who had a different worldview, even people that have a different philosophical belief system, have a different worldview. They still have value and they still matter. And so the reason we were able to reform Oklahoma's workers' compensation system or move things forward as it relates to welfare reform is because we were able to look past the differences and find the commonalities. And I think that's what really good leaders always do. They find out where are the things that we can agree on. There's certainly going to be differences. I mean, I don't even agree with myself every day, much less someone else. But I think a leader has the ability and the assignment to find the things that we agree on and move that agenda forward. I also think, as I mentioned before, by definition, leaders see things that others don't. When you think about, many of the great leaders of our time, of the last century even, whether it's, a Winston Churchill or a Dr. Martin Luther King, or even before that, Abraham Lincoln, they were able to see things that others weren't. They were able to have vision. They were almost like the prophets of the Bible, right? Can you imagine being a prophet? You name one, a major one like Daniel, or a minor one like Habakkuk, or whoever it may be. Can you imagine having a vision that was given to you of something that's going to happen 2,000-3,000 years in the future? You see this vision. You see people walking around with iPhones, or you see people driving cars. And now, after you've given the vision, you've got to go convince these other people who are still riding on donkeys or camels or walking the streets. You've got to go convince them of what you saw and to have credibility with them as well. Well, I don't think the task for leaders today is any different. When you have a vision as a leader, and that's the thing that's required, first thing, your goal, your job, your mission is not always just to get the vision done, but it's to get the people around you to buy into that vision. And that takes a great deal of effort, it takes a great deal of time, and it takes a great deal of investment. It takes a great deal of emotional investment. But it's always worth it, because again, if we're going to see that vision come to fruition as a leadership or as a team, it requires us utilizing the gifts of the people that are around us. Last point I will bring out to you is actually there are three. I think there are really focuses that there are actually how would I phrase it? There are actually moments in time that I think leaders have to be aware of. We have to be aware of what I call sometimes blind spots. There are certain blind spots that we all have as leaders. As people, we have blind spots. There are things about us that we just cannot see. You know, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence these days, and there's a lot of study about emotional intelligence. But the truth is there are blind spots that leaders have, and I think having a trusted source, a trusted ally, a trusted companion, a trusted friend who can help you with those blind spots is critically important, because we all have them, and owning up to it, I think, is one of the toughest tasks before us. I also think it's important as a leader to build a brand. One of the challenges in leadership as organizations get bigger, it's often tough to meet everybody one-on-one. It's often tough, you know, as I know even at Bank 2, we're a commercial lending bank and a mortgage bank, and we've grown quite a bit over the last year by adding new people and new products. It becomes tougher and tougher to reach and touch everybody one-on-one. So as a result, I think it's important that leaders develop their brand of leadership. What is your brand of leadership? And again, there's a lot of research about how that's done and how to do it, but I think it's so important because often when decisions are being made in the heat of the moment, when you don't have time to get all the empirical data, you don't have time to do the research, and your team is trying to think what's the best decision for the organization, that branding will come in, those values will come in. That branding hopefully will be based on the corporate values that you have. But I think that's another critical piece for leaders, is that they have a leadership brand. And finally, I think it's so important as a leader, the hardest thing that we will ever do as a leader, I think, is to make sure that we're having empathy for the people that we serve, whether it be our customers, whether it be our colleagues, or whether it be our superiors. That empathy factor is so important, because again, people want to know first that you care before they care about what you know. We've heard that cliche before, and having true empathy. You know, people sense it. People are attracted to it. It's a light. It's a light shining in darkness when you hear somebody who cares. I mean, I think you think about the last political election. I know we're about to enter another election cycle, but I think what people look for in candidates is this somebody who really cares? No, I haven't found one candidate that I agree with 100% of the time, but the real question is this somebody who cares about the stuff that's important to me? And so in closing, when I think about it, I was thinking about that conversation I had with my 12-year-old daughter about, you know, the guy that she inspired and the guy that she fired out of her group. And I was thinking about her a little bit. She's getting a little older. I was saying at the table, Mark, he was asking me about my daughter. I said, well, there's one problem that I have as a father. She inherited my wife's good looks, but my height. So she's 12 years old, but she looks 16. And that is not a good spot for any father in the room. But it made me think about, when I was thinking about her, I remember a few Christmases ago, I remember my wife and I, my daughter, she must have been about 6 or 7 at the time. And the only thing she wanted for Christmas at this time was a Barbie dream house. And she had been on us for months about this Barbie dream house, you know, and she's a pretty persuasive kid, and we had finally agreed to get it. And I remember the night before, it had come in a couple of days before Christmas, and I didn't listen to my wife and go to Toys R Us. I thought I could save a few dollars and order it online. I did save a little money. The challenge was the instructions were in Spanish. And I don't speak a lick of Spanish, and nobody in my house does. And so it's Christmas Eve. It's, you know, about 3:30 in the morning, and I'm trying to make heads or tails out of these, you know, Barbie dream house directions. And I mean, I am having a hard time. Little did I know the Barbie dream house also required a down payment and a mortgage nearly. But the bigger challenge were these directions, and I began to panic a little bit. I was sleepy, I was tired, I'm ready to get to bed, and I see some other parents waving your heads. You've been there with that Barbie dream house before. And I remember thinking, you know, I've got a few hours before the most beautiful set of brown eyes is going to come running down these steps, expecting to see this Barbie dream house. And so I backed up and I said, okay, TW, this is you know, pressure's on. You got to deliver here. What are you going to do? And I thought, okay, this is not different than other tasks you've had in your life. This is a puzzle. And what's the most important piece of a puzzle? Most important piece of a puzzle is the picture on the box. You got to know what it's supposed to look like when you're finished. And so tonight, this afternoon, what I would implore you, the graduates of this distinguished leadership class, is to tell you thank you for being that picture on the box. Because I believe what this state, what this city, what this nation is hungry for is they're looking for people who will be that picture on the box. What is it supposed to look like? And I thank you for this organization, for the Chamber, for putting it together and making sure that we have people who represent that picture on the box. Thank you so much.